Tom, it's fantastic to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining.
Hey, Louka, it's great to be with you.
Mate, I really think since the last time we spoke, a few small things have happened in terms of disruptions to the global world, to, certainly to the ways of being, not just the ways of learning and working. And, this is a real moment in time for us to think about transformation as one of the kind of big themes that's emerged post, maybe even during pandemic, and certainly now with the other, generative AI, ChatGPT disruptions. So I'd love you just to,
But look,
yeah,
look, I think it's such an interesting time in human history. We've just lived through a global pandemic. It's really the first time in terms of disease and communication and culture and economy and climate that it's obvious that we shared a small hot planet, right? That we've suddenly, just in like the last 36 months, understood how connected we are, right? We've added hyper connected to VUCA in the last 6 months, and whether it's a disease vector or a communication vector or an economic vector. Not right now, the infection is inflation, and a climate vector. I have this overwhelming sense of mutuality that we're experiencing things as a species for the first time, and it feels. And you could add ChatGPT, right, and the way that exploded in December, and suddenly it's used globally by millions of people for fun and learning and other applications. So, wow, what an interesting time on so many different fronts that required organizations, not just learning organizations, but I think all organizations, to sort of rethink mission and deployment, right? How you carry out the work that you've taken on.
Tom, I really like the overview effect. When an astronaut goes into space and then looks back at Earth, and they report having this acute realization that we are fully interconnected. And I think the way you framed all that, it's kind of like we've all been having our own micro overview effects that, oh, wait, everything is connected. And the systems, the legacy systems that we've been utilizing, that we've inherited, frankly, be they economic, be they ecological, be they educational, I think really are at this point of needing to be repurposed and shifted.
Let me add that one of the unfortunate things that signaled by Russia's invasion in Ukraine is that we're living also through a geopolitical recession. And so what Thomas Homer Dixon, a Canadian 15 years ago, predicted in the ingenuity gap, he said, our collective responsibility is going down while the complexity of our shared challenges is going up, right? And so we're facing these global crises, but with less collective responsibility. And so I guess in some respects that is daunting for young people, the new existential threat that many young people feel pretty personally and tangibly. Is that one of the reasons that you feel so strongly about social emotional learning, about well-being? Isn't that an important part of your practice and the way you're thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. Because I feel like one of the questions is, what is a school for? Or what school could be is another great frame, of course, by a colleague of ours. But this idea that, all right, if there's all this disruption happening, and as you say, kind of a decline in the kind of globally, or even the neoliberal narrative, frankly, then what's next? How do we find meaning when we see this collapse of meaning? And clearly it needs to be a return to something, in my view, not an invention towards something necessarily. And that return is, towards deep, fully human ways of learning being. And that's why the elevation of social and emotional dimensions of learning is such a huge part of our practice. And my work as an educator and leader, because I really feel that now, it's always been the moment, Tom. It's like, now's the moment. No, the moment was always. But certainly, when we think about how do we try to bake in the right type of capabilities, even just to cope, to self-regulate in a very complex, ambiguous, and now, as you've said, hyper-connected, now added to VUCA world, it's overwhelming. And so what's the school for? Clearly, it can't just be about academic achievement, because if we get to this point where a young person has succeeded under that traditional model, they've got great grades, they've got a high GPA, that's because we're focused on, as Professor Jean Clinton, a colleague of mine, would say, the tyranny of cognitive obsession. It's actually, what's the point of being a great thinker, Tom, if you aren't socially connected and you can't manage your emotional tone, and you can increase that to being physically well, and even the spiritual question, and to be connected to something greater than yourself, be that religious tradition, or the sense of purpose. What is my life unfolding towards? What might be mine to do, Tom? So I think that perspective.
Louka, I think that's really been our great discovery, or rediscovery of the last 36 months. Our friends Klein and Liang wrote this book, How to Navigate Life, where they called it the purpose mindset.
Yeah.
But we really believe that, I guess we've come to understand the importance of learner agency, and agency come to expressed to be expressed as a sense of purpose, and that idea really has to be central to every institution of learning. That it has to be about helping young person discover who they are and what they're good at, what their interests are, and so where and how they want to begin to make a contribution in the world. We summarized that right at the beginning of the pandemic in a book called Difference Making at the Heart of Learning, and where we argued that this idea of difference making, or contributive learning, a mutual friend would call it, really that sense of purpose of making the world a better place, there's a new opportunity to root those ideas as part of the new mission of education.
It's absolutely right. And even I think it just comes back to the whole notion that we're all connected, and perhaps the journey, Tom, is, you can't evolve unless you're involved. And I don't want to, cite the Hermetic wisdom too early in the conversation, but nothing about us without us. This idea of agency seems to be one of the enormous themes that is emerging from all these other disruptions. As you say, what's the point of, even this kind of growth orientation that we have economically, of infinite growth in a finite world, which, Joseph Stiglitz has a few views on, as do I. I mean, this is a change towards this, that actually it's not about growth, it's about benefit or contribution. So even Dweck's work is beautiful, but it's based in the individual. And so I guess what I'm reflecting on, Tom, is as we redesign our ways of being and learning in our schools, our universities, and our workforces, how do we move to this idea that we individuate as much as possible for one reason only, and that is to contribute back into the collective. And for what purpose? Collective thriving. And that means, Valerie Hannon's work, that means within ourselves, between each other, at the community level, and critically at the planetary level. So how do we start? You can't, if you don't care about something, you don't act. And so how do we begin to, how do we remember to care that we're all in this together? I think is I like this idea of the purpose mindset. It's like, it's not just self-actualization, Tom. It's not, cool, you and I were actualized, we're in our, but no, it's self-transcendence. It's collective actualization. What are we doing this for together? And that, I think, was what Maslow was writing about before he died, actually, but didn't make it into the model, Tom, but it's there really in the thinking,
I opened, with existential dread. And
Yeah.
so
Just, you know.
I want to offer the positive side of this vision is that when a learner comes into a state of agency, it's really the most empowering experience that a young person can have when they begin to understand who they are, where they are in the world, and what they have to offer. It's super empowering. And the second part of this that I'm excited about is that difference making that is more possible than ever. That young people have access today to tools that allow them to make a difference scientifically, legislatively, socially, climate, on every front. It's more possible for an individual young person, and especially a collective of young people, to engage in work that matters to them and to their community and make a tangible benefit. And I think that's enormously exciting. And that's why we try to lift up stories of young people that are changing the world, and show that that's possible. And if we can help more kids live into that sense of possibility, and not just the existential dread that they're inheriting from us, but that sense. We called it Schools Alive with Possibility.
That's beautiful.
When you find schools like that invite young people into difficult questions without easy answers, and then help them frame work important to them and their community, and see the benefits of contribution, I can't think of anything more rewarding than that.
Tom, that's so great. I completely agree with you. I feel like schools as centers of human connectedness, and therefore the question isn't what's broken, how do we fix it? It's what's possible, who cares, and how do we create that together? You know, and I mean, young people today, gosh, there's a lot on their plates. You know, not least of all, kind of the dangerous slide towards nihilism. You know, which is, well, you know, you guys stuffed it up for us, you know, generations before. And yet when you speak with young people like that, those voices, Tom, they're so critical, because, and often in our work, what we'll do is we'll say who, you know, we'll work out who the oldest person in the room is, and we'll honor them as the elder in the room. And then of course we work out who the youngest person in the room is. And of course, a lot of our work and methodology is co-design. You wouldn't be surprised to know, because we think, you know, how do we put the opportunities in the middle of the room and actually sit around them and build together? I really feel it's the only way. Again, nothing about us without us, you know, and young people have so much to contribute. The other piece I think that I reflect on quite often, Tom, is that as someone that is very intellectual and cognitive and just a downright nerd, to be honest with you, and, you know, I see you as well, Tom, but, you know, I feel like reads a lot of books and a lot of ideas. It's just fantastic. What I've really understood is actually there's something about embodiment, you know, or embodied cognition that we're really starting to understand, you know, the extended mind, you know, conception, but also like, how do we realize that actually deep down, far in, you know, it's about who we are, not about what we know. And, you know, this is why the new credential space is interesting for us both and the work we do, because for so long it's been like, well, what do you know? Tell me what you know. Show me what you know. You know, but now, of course, we're, you know, as Tony Wagner often says, it's like, well, it's about what you do with what you know. And of course, no one disagrees with that. Of course it is. But actually, there's a piece beyond that, which is, you know, who am I choosing to be as I do things with what I know? So this is kind of the identity piece, the contribution piece, coupled with skill set. So it's mindset, skill set, knowledge set. And I really feel like if we can get, great education has always gotten to that level of depth, I feel. And of course, it's just been because of the legacy systems and particularly the credentialing systems that we've created. You know, at worst, they take a multi-dimensional human being that's irreducibly unique and turn them into a single number, you know, and perhaps at best or better, is seeing this idea that actually what's ours to do. And I know you've done a lot of work with wayfinding in particular, and how do you support young people to design their way forward? It's not that you find your purpose all of a sudden. Oh, there it is. It's over there. It's by that tree. It's, we experiment. And I think that's why the field of design and our colleagues at the D School, I think, are doing such wonderful work in that space. But I guess that's my question to you, is about the credentials in particular. Like, what are you seeing that's working in service of the transformation agenda in particular? And just before you give a great answer, Tom, just unmute. But I'll make an edit note. Thanks.
I want to answer with a sense of confidence and then a question.
Right.
I'm confident that we are in a period where we're inventing new and better ways to communicate human capability that will send into the background courses and grades and test scores, the traditional forms of talent transmission for the last 150 years. And I do believe that the digital credentials based on demonstrated competence, riding in open and interoperable learning and employment records will give us a much more full, a much more complete way to curate the way we share our capabilities with others, whether it's a college or an employer or a potential partner and scholarship organization. However, I guess I'm old enough now that I worry about unintended consequences, and I as in real time, as we're designing new credentialing systems to better capture and communicate a high school experience, I worry that we will recreate a new system of standardized assessments, just smaller chunks. Instead of a 3-hour end of course exam, we'll have 30 15-minute credential exams. And so I think one of the design questions of our day is, can we create a credentialing system that creates a positive spiral of deeper learning, not a negative spiral of dead end regurgitation. So I think that's a question that we just have to keep fresh and in front of us as we're inventing new systems.
I feel like
so I'm excited about all the credentialing projects that we're involved in, but I'm mindful of how to make this generative.
Yes.
Right, rather than something that deteriorates into another system that we just have to reform and replace 20 years from now.
Well, I remember, walking into High Tech High, Tom, and Larry Rosenstock would always stop and point above his door where he had Campbell's Law just, printed out across 5, sheets of paper. The idea that as soon as we have a metric towards which we aspire, it begins to corrupt the system within which it operates. Right. And it's such a powerful way to think about, okay, well, if this is what success is, if we're not careful, we orient everything that way and we actually forget about the actual activity that gets us to the success. We start to try to shortcut, problematically so. So I feel like that is one of the challenges for, I think, everyone working in the new metrics, new credential space. I do like the shift from testing to recognition, and from, in some ways towards evidencing. I think is a far better way to think about our, the way that we try to broaden and I would say humanize, although that triggers some people, Tom, but really humanize these systems so they become more human-centered in their design, away from, in some ways, the competition towards a more, well, actually, here's what's mine to do. And, if we think about the ikigai, that beautiful Japanese principle that I often share it through my work, because I just think it sums it up. What am I good at? What can I get paid for? The professional side, coupled with what do I love? And then ultimately, what does the world need? And it's I just feel like it's system failure, Tom, when we have young people who are placed in these positions where they choose not to study something that brings them life, that makes them feel fully alive, a passion, because they think if they study a different subject, the system will reward them more highly because they're good at it. And I feel like that line that we've drawn, which is about what are you good at, what can you get paid for, is the legacy of mass education systems. I'm very pro-employment, Tom. Don't get me wrong. Like having a job is the most powerful way to create meaning in your life and to contribute back into an economy and a marketplace. But it's not sufficient unless that role includes your life, includes other aspects. Yes, it's about moving towards more and more doing what you love. But I think stoically, because I've been informed by that group of thinkers, it's also loving what you do, appreciating what's in your life and choosing to be the person you aspire to be, as much as that's possible in a world that's overwhelmed with existential dread and anxiety, frankly, as well. We haven't spoken about mental health, but the World Health Organization was already talking about that being the greatest global burden of disease, being depression, not some of the other physical ailments that we have, but some of these psychological ones. So I wonder about credentials as being one of the ways that we can unlock, I think, the way that systems have worked. And frankly, that the hidden grammar, which is, what's the school for? Well, we say it's for the whole child, but actually we're still going to give you a number at the end of the day. And everyone knows that. And even, hardworking educators know that, and they want their young people to succeed. So of course you're going to use the metric. So and there's some work happening down here with a group I'm involved in, Learning Creates Australia, that are doing some really interesting work in that space. How do you create a new recognition system for our country down here? What might that look like? How do learner profiles, passports, portfolios, and eventually wallets, play a role as part of the new learning economies, space, and skills gaps, all that equity, all that space. It's exciting, but I agree with you. I think we have to not just reinflate the same challenges, perhaps.
Our friends at Big Picture, in this case, Big Picture Australia, have created an international passport that we think is an interesting model. And the call before this one, Louka, was with our friends at Da Vinci schools in Los Angeles, and they build a spiral of ikigai. They begin inviting ninth graders to ask themselves that question of who am I, and what am I good at, and what do I care about, and how could I turn that into a sustainable business model? And so I love the way they're thinking about not only educational experiences, but incorporating work-based learning. So engaging with the community so that there's community-based learning experiences that are also part of this ikigai spiral. And they'll capture those work-based learning experiences in a portfolio. And so I think combining traditional uses of credentials with evidence of experiences, and including portfolios, is going to be in this extended transcript into a learner record that incorporates multiple forms of evidence that I think more fully allow young people to express who they are and where and how they have made a difference, and then to express their aspirations for future contribution in new and better ways.
Yeah, Tom, to me that sounds like fabulous work. I must go and see that in Los Angeles. I feel like
the challenge is we have to build marketplaces, right, where these become new communication mechanisms that are recognized by multiple parties, and so that's the challenge, to make these simple, understandable, verifiable, meaningful, trustworthy.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the top design challenges of this decade.
I agree. I feel like, well, I'm the work of the Learning Economy Foundation in particular. I'm really interested in that idea of how do you create open standards, interoperable systems where things actually can speak to each other. We need to think ecosystemically about this. Otherwise, we end up with 1,000 flowers, which is beautiful, blooming, but of course, there's no coherence anymore. Easy to say, very difficult to do, and I think long, slow engagement, co-design work is the way forward there. Tom, I feel like the other piece on the credentials is if you've got 1,000 learner wallets or learner portfolios going into a university, how on earth are, this is one of the interesting questions. How does admissions come deal with that? And the answer, frankly, is eventually, increasingly, looking at automation. And we haven't spoken to it that much in our conversation, but generative AI, November 30th, 2022 is a date that my deep AI friends, have marked in their calendars, because there's before that moment and after it, not because new tech happened, but because the paywall was removed in some ways. And so ChatGPT, based on 3.5 OpenAI, educators are paying attention, as are, big tech companies across the board.
In a new way. Yeah.
Yeah. In a new way.
Paying attention and paying attention for a variety of reasons, right? AI has been pervasive for 5 years now in every sector. Every facet of life has become computational. So that's the first reaction that I want to stress, that every field of endeavor, social impact projects to every form of enterprise, is now computational. And so the first implication is that the core human development goals now must include the ability to name and frame a project or a problem, to work with a diverse team, including smart tools, to produce value for a community. So I think that's the first implication of life with AI, is that school has to be about problem framing first and foremost. We've just never historically invited kids into framing problems. We give them small bite-sized problems with the right answer. So invite them into framing problems, invite them to work in diverse teams, including smart tools, to produce value for a community. So you think of that as the entrepreneurial mindset. So I think that's the first implication. The second implication is that, as was so evidenced like 70 days ago, 80 days ago, these tools now threaten traditional pedagogy and
assessment
in ways that most people didn't imagine a few months ago.
Yeah.
Right. It's sort of for English teachers, a lot of your lesson plans, your book reports sort of went out the window. Louka, I saw a survey last week that about a third of college students are already using ChatGPT for their assignments. So this went 0 to high penetration in a matter of weeks. I don't think we've ever seen anything like that before. Back to that hyper connected world that we live in now. And so I think you and I agree that banning tools like that's not the right answer, but
it can't be.
Can we acknowledge that embracing it and learning to use it is an interesting new challenge?
And I think, Tom, again, I think it really comes back to mindset. If we see this as a danger to our ways of doing, being, teaching, assessing, it is. But if you see it as a possibility to your ways of being, teaching, learning, doing, it is. And so there's this idea that actually how we frame this as an opportunity rather than a problem to dismiss or a disruptor that we don't want to deal with. I mean, I think, you know, and it's happening there in the US as well, as it is here in Australia. You know, big jurisdictions have just banned it outright. And I think I would say that those are temporary while they try to work out, well, actually, how do we do, you know, I've long said, Tom, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, that what we call resourcefulness and enterprise in the real world, we call cheating in schools. And, you know, it's kind of bizarre, you know, so, and remember the old days when you'd say, oh, like great pedagogy is asking non-Googleable questions. There were non-search engine questions. Now the question is, well, actually good pedagogy increasingly is, you know, asking questions that go beyond basic computation to ones that have ethics, have the social, the emotional aspects all involved. And so it's a very exciting and terrifying moment simultaneously, I think, for schools and workplaces and, you know, Google, you know, for the search engines, because computation is coming. It's here.
I do think there's a strong parallel with the use of calculators in schools.
Yeah.
I'm very much in favor of teaching mathematics as if computers existed. I think about half of what is taught in the United States in mathematics is not useful. It's the rote memorization of hand calculation routines that no one ever uses. And it's become a barrier to, it's the reason most kids hate math and don't do well, because what we teach is so irrelevant to real life. And I'm saying that as an engineer and a former finance guy, and you know, I haven't factored a polynomial in 40 years, so I'm comfortable with a new mental model that I have developed on how we should teach mathematics, particularly math modeling, in the age of computers. I would admit that I'm still, because we're only like 8 weeks into this, still developing a mental model of how we ought to use generative tools like ChatGPT, because I firmly believe in the importance of writing and learning how to write as a core form of human expression, of understanding who you are and what you think and know about the world.
Yes.
And so that mental model is being challenged by this new tool. And I think that's true for most educators around the world. And I've come to an early uneasy truth with some of the guidelines that you described. I'd like students to become comfortable using these generative tools, and simultaneously, I very much want them to be able to express themselves in writing proficiently without using external tools. And anyway, I'm just acknowledging that I'm early in having a new mental model and understanding how public systems will deploy that sort of a mental model that embraces a new set of tools. And I think we can agree that these capabilities are going to keep coming faster and faster, and that it just means we're going to have to be more agile than we've ever been at reconceptualizing what a learning journey looks like and the ways in which tools are incorporated into that.
Tom, absolutely. And, you know, here's to neurogenesis. Do you know what I mean? Like, the mental model's changing. Like, there's a lot going on in a lot of brains around the world right now, including my own and yours. I just want to reflect on something you've said. You know, really, like, why write? Why write an essay? Why put down your thoughts in a coherent, compelling way? Because that is a modality that helps us learn how to think and how to think for ourselves. You know, so that's the first piece in this. You know, all these assessments, yes, they are about the products, but why do the products, you know, actually the process now? I mean, that's the big opportunity here. This is the product, I can press a button and there's my product, Tom. So all of a sudden, our gaze that was always on product as a proxy for process now somehow needs to shift towards, well, process. And again, that means formative assessment. It means evidencing, as opposed to just taking a single point in time, high stakes assessment, closed book. You know, I think that's just I think that's a benefit that we should really try to unpack. I mean, the other piece I often think about is cognitive load theory when we discuss, because, you know, I disagree with people that say, oh, you don't need any knowledge, Tom. Knowledge is ubiquitous. You just need skill. You need skill to find the knowledge. I say, well, yes, that's true. But, you know, the knowledge of reading comprehension, for example, is a key. And the threshold argument is one I subscribe to, which is if your cognition is too overloaded because you haven't reached automaticity in some of the basic calculations or in the basic language structures or analysis, you can't do discernment well. You can't do critical thinking well. And, you know, this is why oracy, I've always been, you know, I'm an applied linguist as one of my hats, and, you know, learning how to speak. I'm a drama teacher too. Learning how to speak, right? Oracy precedes literacy. And so are we actually asking the right questions and doing Socratic seminar and engaging in these participatory pedagogies more? I mean, with ChatGPT here, isn't it? I mean, it's going to be painful, but it's also very exciting that we can actually shift and say, well, now if we do this right and redesign it right, we can elevate what I would consider the most human aspects of this experience of life and our experiences of learning, and frankly of contribution and workforce, you know. And so doing the kind of routine, always, the trend has been really clear, Tom, you know, the routine, manual and cognitive has been left to now AI. And so it's the non-routine, it's the emergent, it's the truly creative. You know, I feel like ChatGPT gives us the opportunity to become more creative and be more creative hustlers, to use, you know, Sam Seidel's beautiful frame of his book. You know, like this idea of, yeah, how do you take this idea, use the tools available as a young person, and then create something remarkable? And I mean, there's just example after example in every community of young people taking this so far beyond what we thought it might have been used for.
Let's also acknowledge that we've been talking about some of the big design challenges of this decade. So the design challenge here is to invent a new form of ethics, right? A new way to be together collectively with these new tools. And what we need, a new set of ethics around human expression, writing and art and music. We need new business models.
Yes.
Around these that encourage rather than discouraging human expression. And we need a new way to acknowledge contributions, both man and machine, to forms of human expression. The other aspect of ethics is that I'm afraid AI is accelerating a winner-take-all or winner-take-most economy.
Yeah.
And so I'm really disturbed about the level of inequality and the way many of the factors we talked about at the opening, pandemic, climate change, as well as AI, are ratcheting inequity. And so in addition to a new ethic for this age, we need, feels like a new economy for this age, one that is, as you said beautifully, is reflective of more of a collective than the individual. So we have work to do.
Yeah, maybe we got some, just a little, but I'm an optimist about this. I do feel like these tools, if deployed properly, I completely concur with the view on ethics. You know, who owns what, and we are seeing, I think, such a chasm now between the truly creative class and then the consumerist class, and that's a danger when you have 8 people owning the same amount of wealth than you know, than the 3.5 other billion, you know, poorer people of the planet. Right. I mean, that's a design flaw at the heart, I think, of our society that ought to be rectified in some way. And I'm not sure exactly how that happens, but, you know, people like Mariana Mazzucato and Professor Kate Raworth and others, these are female professors of economics. They've got some really good things to say about it. And so I would just point to their work and say, all right, donut economics, social foundation, ecological ceiling. How do we do that? How do the metrics change at a city level, at a state level, district, you know, national and international? And I don't know, when we're having a conversation about the next SDGs, Tom, I think, you know, we'll be thinking about, I think, transformative regeneration will probably be the frame I think we might need by then, which is not sustainability. No, we need to regenerate. And that's not just an ecological framing. That's also a human framing. That's a way of thinking about equity. We need regenerative practices here. Yeah.
Let's add that to the big design challenges of our day.
Yeah. Wow.
And I guess the wonderful opportunity is the chance to invite young people in secondary schools and in post-secondary institutions into that work. We think that's a beautiful way to frame up a secondary and post-secondary education around those shared global goals.
Yeah. There's a real conversation about power, I think, Tom, that's taking place and needs to take place. And, you know, this is like, are people going to give power? Do educators give power to young people? Do communities give power? Are those that hold it willing to share it? I mean, that's a really interesting, I think it's the only way we do transformation is we repurpose, we repower, and then we repractice. And that's just to quote the big change work out of the UK. I really think that's the way that we transform our world, our systems, our community, and maybe even, Tom, ourselves. Who knows? Tom, it's been such a wonderful delight to speak with you after, you know, a couple of years. Well, actually just a year since we last spoke at South by Southwest, but I really appreciate the work that you and the team do at Getting Smart. And I just think you're gentle yet beautifully critical way that you think about the future of learning. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. And it's been great to be a part of this conversation as well and support the work that you're all up to there.
Great to be with you, Louka. Thanks for your beautiful vision of what's possible in learning. And can we consider this a conversation to be continued?
That's definitely. No, you know, you're ending your day over there. I'm starting mine. I'm going to be mulling on all these things for the rest of the day. But yeah, definitely some more deep work to come. And you know, long-term work with long-term people, Tom. To quote Naval, that's the way to go. So, mate, it's a real pleasure. Until next time.
Thank you. Until next time.